Millionaire tech CEO mocks janitor's son until the boy destroys her at the company chess event. "Bring the janitor's kid over here," Madison Crane said, sipping her wine without even looking up. Her voice floated through the marble and glass atrium of Crane Tech's Seattle headquarters like perfume hiding poison. "Let's see if he even knows what a bishop is." Laughter scattered across the room. Small, rich, rehearsed. The kind of laugh people give when they're not sure if they should, but want to be seen doing it anyway. Angela Carter froze in place, her hands gripping the silver tray a little tighter. Her son, Liam, barely 16, turned his head slowly toward the woman who had just turned him into the evening's entertainment. "Is she serious?" Someone near the fruit platter whispered. "She's always serious," another chuckled. "This is her kind of joke." Madison stood now, all designer silk and perfect posture, her heels clicking on imported Italian tile as she pointed to the antique chess set at the center of the room. "Come on, sweetheart," she called, louder this time. "Don't be shy. You'll have a great story to tell your little friends. How you played chess in a billion-dollar company's lobby. That's got to be better than your school cafeteria, right?" Liam didn't move. Not right away. He simply blinked, then scanned the room with quiet precision. The waitstaff paused. Several guests stopped mid-sip. Even the jazz trio in the corner lowered their volume, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. "He probably doesn't even know how the pieces move," a man near the whiskey bar muttered. "I bet he calls the knight a horse." Another chuckled. "This is cruel," a woman whispered. "No," her husband replied, eyes fixed on Liam. "This is going to be interesting." And just like that, the boy nodded once. "Sure," he said. "I'll play." In that moment, no one knew they'd just invited a storm to sit at the table. Liam stepped forward with a quiet confidence that didn't match his age, or his worn-out sneakers. The crowd parted, as if pushed by an invisible force. He walked past executives in tailored suits and designer dresses, past champagne glasses half raised in anticipation, past his mother who stood motionless by the wall, her lips pressed into a tight line. Angela didn't call out to him. She didn't need to. Liam didn't look back. He never did when he was focused. He reached the ornate chess table where Madison Crane now sat waiting, legs crossed, fingers tapping against the armrest of a $7,000 Italian chair. The chess set in front of her gleamed under the overhead lighting. The pieces were handcrafted, polished ivory and jet-black obsidian, imported from Florence, she once boasted. They weren't meant to be touched by just anyone. Madison gestured toward the board with a casual flick of her hand. "I always play white," she said with the same tone one might use to explain which fork is for salad. "You'll take black. Ready?" Liam nodded once. No smile, no hesitation. "Good," she continued, moving a pawn forward. "E4. It's the most common opening. The king's pawn. Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it." She gave a wink to the crowd. A few chuckles followed. Without a word, Liam responded, "C5. A ripple ran through the room. Someone whispered, "That's the Sicilian defense." A man near the back raised an eyebrow. "That's a real move." Another replied under his breath, "He probably saw it on YouTube." But someone else, older, quiet until now, said softly, "You don't play the Sicilian by accident." Madison paused, if only for a split second. Then she laughed, waving it off. "Well, look at that. We've got a little chess enthusiast on our hands." She leaned forward, voice low but sharp. "Let's see how long that confidence lasts." Liam said nothing. He made his next move with precision, placing each piece in the center of its square, as if the board mattered more to him than the people around it. Angela watched from the corner of the room, her breath shallow. Her son didn't flinch, not once. In the background, the jazz trio had stopped playing entirely. The room had shifted. What began as a casual diversion, a corporate queen amusing herself, was slowly turning into something else. Something far less predictable. Liam's next move came swiftly, again without pause. A bishop developed, then a knight, then castling, efficient, calculated, textbook. Madison, now less performative, furrowed her brow and took slightly longer to respond. "You're playing fast," she said. "In real chess, we think before we move." Liam looked up, finally meeting her eyes. His voice was quiet, but clear. "I've already thought it through." No one laughed this time, because in that moment, even the most skeptical person in the room realized this wasn't going to be the game they expected. Madison narrowed her eyes slightly, trying to hide the twitch in her brow. It was subtle, barely there, but noticeable to those paying attention. And in that room, more people were paying attention now than before. What started as a novelty, a poor kid playing chess against a billionaire, was beginning to feel different. The rhythm of the room had shifted. Laughter had faded into murmurs, and murmurs into silence. Madison made another move, confidently pushing a knight forward. Liam answered almost instantly, developing his other bishop, creating tension on the long diagonal. One of the senior engineers whispered, "That's a fianchetto. He's going for a hypermodern setup." The guest next to him blinked. "You play chess?" "I played in college," the man replied. This isn't a joke. He's setting up something complicated." Across the room, a product manager whispered to her friend, "Is he just fast? Or is he actually good?" "Too early to say," the other replied, but her voice had lost its earlier sarcasm. "But he hasn't hesitated once. Not once." Madison leaned back, attempting to regain the upper hand through posture alone. "You know, it's not about speed," she said aloud, addressing the room as much as Liam. "Chess is a thinking game. It's about foresight, about understanding the long game, not just reacting." Liam adjusted a rook and said quietly, "That's why I'm not reacting." Madison stiffened slightly. A few guests exchanged glances. The confidence in his tone, it wasn't arrogance. It was certainty. Controlled. Measured. The kind that didn't come from ego, but from hours of repetition and mastery. Liam wasn't playing fast because he was careless. He was playing fast because he had already played this game in his head 100 times. He knew the terrain, and now, for the first time in years, Madison Crane wasn't sure if she did. Her next move came slower. She touched a pawn, then hesitated. Her fingers hovered. Liam sat still, waiting. Not a twitch, not a blink. Someone near the refreshments muttered, "Why is she hesitating? It's her opening repertoire, isn't it?" Another replied, "Yeah, but she's not in control anymore. She's reacting." The irony was thick. The woman who led global markets, who dictated the fate of entire departments with a single sentence, now found herself being led by a 16-year-old boy in second-hand sneakers, and every move he made pushed her one step further from her comfort zone. "Does she even know what he's building?" someone whispered, "because it looks like he's closing in on the center." "He's not just closing in," said the senior engineer, voice hushed but tense. "He's squeezing her, slowly, efficiently." Angela stood silently near the wall, hands clasped together. She saw it too, not just the moves on the board, but the shift in energy. Her son, so quiet at home, so reserved in public, was now commanding a room full of people who wouldn't have given him a second glance an hour ago. Madison placed another piece. It wasn't a bad move, but it wasn't strong either. It was cautious, defensive, and for someone like her, that was more revealing than any word she could say. Liam responded instantly, and for the first time, a ripple of awe moved through the crowd. This wasn't a lucky kid getting by. This was a strategist. And the game had only just begun. Liam's fingers hovered over the board for just a moment before placing his knight with a quiet, deliberate click. It was the kind of move that seemed simple, almost casual, but those watching closely could tell it was more than that. It was placement with purpose. Madison stared at the board a little too long before moving. Her fingers tapped her chin, her confident facade beginning to show microscopic cracks. The tension in the room was thick, but inside Liam's mind, it was quiet. He could hear only his breathing and the distant echo of memories that had shaped this very moment. He remembered the first time he touched a chess piece. It wasn't carved from marble or sitting on a polished board in a glass lobby. It was plastic, chipped, and part of a second-hand set he'd found in a donation bin outside the community center. He was 8. The rulebook was missing. He'd sat on the curb, flipping through a half-torn instruction sheet someone had scribbled notes on with blue ink. That night he asked his mother what checkmate meant. She was half asleep, exhausted from a double shift scrubbing stairwells. "It means the game is over," she'd whispered without opening her eyes. But Liam didn't want the game to be over. He wanted to know how it worked, why the pieces moved the way they did, why the knight didn't go straight like the others, why the bishop was bound to diagonals. He wanted to understand the rules so that one day he could break them the right way. Over the years, he built a system: chess books borrowed from the public library, worn pages bookmarked with sticky notes made from old receipts, YouTube videos watched on a second-hand phone with a cracked screen, puzzles solved by candlelight when the power was cut off. When other kids played video games, Liam played endgames. When they traded sneakers and jokes, he traded ideas with grandmasters he had never met: Fischer, Carlsen, Kasparov, through digital footprints left behind in annotated games. His opponents didn't know he existed, but he knew every mistake they'd ever made on the board. And now, the polished room filled with people who wore watches worth more than his apartment was staring at him, trying to decipher how he was outmaneuvering a woman who had ruled this space for a decade. Liam didn't feel nervous. He felt ready. This wasn't a surprise. This was inevitable. Madison finally moved. A bishop sweep across the board, an aggressive reach she clearly hadn't calculated more than one layer deep. Liam didn't react. He simply looked at the board as if he were already standing 5 moves ahead. And he was. Because this wasn't just about chess anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about control, about space, about value. Concepts that were just as true in life as they were on the board. And Madison Crane, for the first time, was beginning to understand what it felt like to be surrounded without realizing it, until it was too late. Madison Crane had never liked feeling watched unless she was the one commanding the attention. For most of her career, when she entered a room, the energy shifted in her favor. Eyes followed her because they had to, not because they wanted to. But now, sitting across from a teenager in discount sneakers and a hand-me-down shirt, she could feel the weight of every gaze, and not one of them felt like admiration. She made her next move slower than before, pretending to think, though her thoughts were scattered. Liam's last few moves hadn't just complicated the position, they had reversed the pressure. She had been expecting a child mimicking YouTube tutorials, but this boy was navigating the board like a surgeon. No wasted motion, no flashy risks, just precise, quiet domination. A murmur rose near the back of the room. "She's on the ropes," someone whispered. "She can't hold the center anymore." "He's squeezing the queen side," another voice replied. "If she doesn't reposition soon, she's done." Madison heard them. Of course she did. The acoustics of the atrium were designed to carry even the softest sounds. She smiled tightly, trying to brush it off. "You all seem very invested," she said, forcing a little laugh. "Maybe we should sell tickets next time." No one laughed with her. A beat of silence passed. The jazz trio in the corner was now completely still. Even the servers, trained to blend into the background, had paused. One was holding a tray in midair, forgetting to move. Everyone was watching Liam. Madison cleared her throat and leaned forward. "Tell me, Liam," she said, louder now. "How long have you been playing?" "Long enough," he replied, without looking up. His tone was steady, effortless. Not disrespectful, not arrogant, just sure. She muttered, moving a pawn to the edge, then immediately regretting it. Liam countered with a rook swing that cut across the board like a blade. It didn't capture anything, but it threatened everything. The room collectively exhaled. Madison stared at the board, blinking twice. She knew that pattern. She had seen it once, at a tournament years ago when she had paid someone to teach her just enough openings to impress board members at company retreats. But she didn't remember how it ended. Liam did. Of course he did. Across the room, someone muttered, "That's not a coincidence. He's baiting her. He wants her to go left." Madison looked up sharply. "Do you all think he's winning?" she said, trying to smile, but her voice had lost its sharpness. "Is this what you call winning?" Liam, still calm, tilted his head slightly. "Winning isn't always loud," he said softly. "Sometimes it's just quiet control." That line hung in the air longer than anything he'd said all night. It didn't sound like something a kid his age should know, but it felt true. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, not because Liam was rude, but because Madison was unraveling. And in corporate rooms like this, power was everything. And power, clearly, was slipping from her grip. Move by move, glance by glance, the unthinkable was happening. Madison Crane was being outplayed, and worse, everyone could see it. Liam's next move was so fast, so fluid, it looked almost casual. He lifted his bishop, paused for less than a breath, and placed it with absolute certainty. The piece landed in a position that didn't seem threatening, at least not to the untrained eye, but the silence that followed told a different story. One of the investors near the back straightened in his seat. "Wait," he muttered, leaning forward. A product director, still holding a half-empty glass of Cabernet, lowered it slowly. "He just lined up a pin, didn't he?" Across the room, a regional vice president whispered, "I think he's setting a trap." The murmurs rippled outward like sound waves across still water, soft but unignorable. Madison stared at the board, trying to maintain composure, but something in her jaw tightened. She knew something had shifted, even if she couldn't quite see how. She moved a knight out of reflex, not calculation, hoping to regain some initiative. Liam responded immediately. A pawn advanced, just one square. Simple, quiet, and devastating. One of the engineers gasped. "No," he said, eyes wide. "That's a chain reaction." Someone else whispered, "He just set up a discovered attack." "A what?" asked a younger employee. "It means," the engineer replied, "if she moves the wrong piece, she loses the queen. And if she saves the queen, she's checkmated in 5. Madison was blinking more often now. Her fingers hovered over a piece, then withdrew. She looked at the board, then at Liam, then back again. "This isn't possible," she said, more to herself than to him. "You're bluffing." Liam didn't respond. He didn't have to. The board was speaking for him. Madison finally made a move, one meant to block an immediate threat, but it was a mistake. The moment her fingers left the piece, Liam's rook cut diagonally, placing her king in check. Not checkmate, yet, but close. Too close. A hushed murmur broke out. Someone had started filming on their phone, discreetly. Not for social media, not yet, but because they knew something was happening that no one would believe unless they saw it. Angela, still standing silently near the edge of the room, clutched her hands together tightly. She wasn't breathing. Not really. Not since her son made that bishop move 3 turns ago. She had seen this face before, at the kitchen table when he was 12, solving puzzles in silence while eating toast. At the library desk, hunched over a paperback on openings, flipping pages without looking up. That expression. The absolute calm of someone who knew they weren't guessing. Madison leaned back slightly, her posture slipping. She looked around the room. The faces she normally commanded were no longer smiling, no longer amused. Now they watched her the way they watched him, objectively, analytically, like two players on equal footing. No, worse, like he was above her. Liam moved his queen now, not to check, not to capture, but to position. He was tightening the web. The guests, many of whom had dismissed him as a novelty minutes earlier, now watched in stunned silence. And in that moment, everyone realized that this game was no longer about teaching a kid a lesson. It was about surviving one. Madison had stepped into a chess match expecting an audience. What she got was a reckoning. And she wasn't just losing pieces, she was losing control. Liam didn't need to look at the board anymore. His next few moves were already lined up in his mind like dominoes, waiting to fall with surgical precision. But he didn't move right away. Instead, he looked up, not at Madison, not at the guests, but at his mother. Angela stood stiffly near the edge of the room, half hidden by the towering floral arrangement that framed the entrance. Her apron was still tied tightly around her waist, smudged from hours of carrying trays no one thanked her for. Her expression was frozen, caught somewhere between disbelief and fear. Not fear that he would lose, but fear of what would happen when he won. Liam rose quietly from his chair. The room tensed with the motion, expecting something dramatic. But he didn't raise his voice. He didn't grandstand. He simply walked toward his mother with the same calm he'd used all evening. "Mom," he said, softly enough that only those closest could hear, but clearly enough that the whole room seemed to lean in. "Remember when you told me one day I'd show them?" Her lips parted, but no words came. He smiled gently, not with triumph, but with warmth. "I think today's that day." Angela's eyes filled before she could stop it. She nodded once, the kind of nod a mother gives when years of sacrifice and silence are finally seen. The room remained still. There was no music, no glasses clinking, no shallow applause, just a thick, reverent quiet. The kind that only falls when truth is finally louder than pride. Behind them, Madison tapped her manicured nails against the armrest of her chair. "Are we done with the emotional break?" she asked, voice sharp again, though thinner now. "I do have other things to do today." Liam didn't answer right away. He turned and walked calmly back to the board, sat down, and adjusted a single piece, not because it was out of place, but because it was about to become the turning point. The next move would be the one that would end her strategy entirely. But in that moment, the real match had already been won. Because for the first time in the room, filled with wealth, status, and curated appearances, everyone had seen something real. Not just a boy beating a CEO, but a son honoring a mother who had sacrificed everything, and a mother seeing her child not as someone small in a room of giants, but as the only person in the room standing tall. Liam placed his fingers on the rook again, ready to continue the match. But now, every piece he touched felt heavier, not from the pressure of the game, but from the weight of a promise finally fulfilled. Liam sat back down with the same composure he'd carried all evening. But something in the room had changed. Not just the air, not just the eyes on him, something deeper. The silence no longer felt like the breath before a laugh or the stillness of anticipation. It felt reverent, like people were waiting to witness something final. Madison tapped her fingers harder now, her confidence unraveling with every beat. She glanced at the board, trying to spot a trap, anything that might explain the tightening pressure around her position. But it was too late. She had already stepped into it. Liam moved, just one square. His rook slid across the board with that soft, deliberate click that had become the metronome of this match. The moment it landed, several people gasped. Not out of shock, but out of realization. "He just cut off the king's escape," someone whispered. "He's forcing her to choose between her queen or her safety." Madison frowned. "That's not possible," she muttered. "There's got to be a counter." She stared at the board, her eyes scanning the pattern, but no matter which angle she looked from, there was no way out. Her king was boxed in, her queen under threat, and Liam's pieces weren't just well placed, they were suffocating. She moved a bishop in a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. Liam responded instantly, dropping his queen into position, and said, in the calmest voice in the room, "Check." Madison flinched, not visibly, but enough that those near her caught it. Her eyes flicked around the board. She could block, sacrifice a knight, but it wouldn't matter. Even if she stalled, the next few moves were already lined up like falling dominoes. Every piece she could use to defend was either trapped, exposed, or irrelevant. And worst of all, she knew it. The people around her knew it too. Guests who had once chuckled at her jokes, who toasted her speeches, now leaned in not with admiration, but curiosity, watching what she would do when stripped of advantage. Madison looked up at Liam, and for the first time that night, truly saw him. Not a janitor's kid, not a gimmick, a player. No, more than that, a mind, a presence, a challenge she had never anticipated. "You memorized that," she said quickly, trying to regain some ground. "That's not your own. You copied it." Liam tilted his head, then replied with quiet clarity. "Game 23. Kasparov versus Karpov, 1984. I studied every variation. You walked into one of them 4 moves ago." Madison blinked, then glanced around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to back her. But the faces staring back weren't laughing anymore. Some looked stunned, some embarrassed, some even proud. But none looked like they wanted to save her. She reached for a piece, then stopped. Her hand hovered, trembled, and finally dropped back into her lap. Her voice came out soft, dry, broken. I resign." Liam didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded once, stood up, and adjusted his chair politely as he stepped back from the board. The room remained still, like time had paused to process what had just happened. Then slowly, someone began to clap. It was a quiet, deliberate sound, not sarcastic, not forced, genuine. Then another person joined, and another, until the room, once filled with whispers and condescension, now echoed with applause. Angela's hands covered her mouth. Her eyes glistened. Her son didn't just win a game. He had just dismantled a hierarchy, in silence, with precision, and in front of the very people who thought he didn't belong in the room. Madison stood slowly, but no one was looking at her anymore. All eyes were on the boy who had just checkmated an empire with nothing but memory, strategy, and unwavering calm. The queen had fallen, but the game, for Liam, was just beginning. The news didn't break with a press release. It didn't need to. It broke with whispers, with discreet videos, with the unmistakable hum of something real, spreading through digital veins faster than any memo or media plan ever could. The first clip went online within the hour, shaky footage taken from behind a tray of untouched wine glasses, capturing the final moments of the match. Madison Crane, stone-faced, unable to move, and Liam Carter standing tall beside the fallen king. No theatrics, no gloating, just quiet, devastating certainty. Within 24 hours, the video had over 300,000 views. Within 72, it had crossed 2 million. The caption read, "Teenage janitor's son defeats billionaire CEO in live chess match and humbles the room." People didn't just share it because of the chess. They shared it because of what it represented. A boy from nowhere dismantling someone who represented everything that had always said no to people like him. It hit a nerve. On LinkedIn, professionals reposted it with hashtags like #humility and #realtalent. On Twitter, it became a symbol of class reckoning. TikTok stitched it with reactions, breakdowns, even amateur commentary from chess coaches who analyzed Liam's strategy with stunned admiration. And then came the questions. Who is Liam Carter? Where did he learn to play like that? Is this real? CraneTech didn't respond to media inquiries. Madison Crane didn't post a single word. But the silence from their side only fueled the attention more. The board had been flipped, and the world was watching. Meanwhile, Liam stayed quiet. He went back to school like nothing happened. He didn't grant interviews, didn't post. He didn't need to. His mother, Angela, still worked her shift that week, but something had shifted in how people looked at her. The people who once walked past her now nodded. Some offered a quiet, "Good evening." Others simply looked away, unsure how to handle the sudden awareness of her humanity. Madison, on the other hand, was no longer welcome at the same brunches, the same round-table panels. Her authority hadn't been stripped officially. It had just faded. Her name was quietly removed from an upcoming leadership summit. A corporate board she sat on posted a vague announcement about rotating seats for diversity. Even inside CraneTech, the mood shifted. Employees whispered when she walked past. They remembered how she had smiled at Liam before the match began, how she had mocked him openly. And now she wasn't feared. She was pitied. Worse, ignored. Liam had not just won a game. He had taken the oxygen out of the room that had sustained her image. And the most extraordinary part was this. He hadn't done it to destroy her. He'd done it to keep a promise, to prove, quietly and absolutely, that brilliance could come from anywhere, especially from places people like Madison never bothered to look. And that truth, soft, undeniable, and spreading, was now impossible to ignore. 3 weeks after the match, a letter arrived at the Carter apartment, folded neatly inside an envelope embossed with the seal of a university most people only ever saw on TV. Liam opened it at the kitchen table, the same table where he had once solved tactical problems by candlelight, the same table where his mother had once cried silently over late bills. He didn't say anything at first, just read it once, then again, then handed it to Angela without a word. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the page, and when she saw the words, "full academic scholarship," she covered her mouth, not to hold back a scream, but to hold in years of disbelief finally coming undone. Stanford, full ride, not just for chess, for engineering, for leadership, for everything he had proven that night without uttering more than a dozen sentences. He didn't celebrate. He just nodded, smiled once, and said, "We won't have to worry anymore." But Liam wasn't content with a scholarship. He wasn't content with going silent after all the noise. 2 weeks later, he launched a website. Simple, clean, direct. Checkmate Inequality. It wasn't just a clever name. It was a mission. A free online chess program for kids in underserved communities. Every account came with video lessons, beginner modules, and downloadable puzzles, most of which Liam had created himself. It offered not just games, but mentorships, volunteers from universities, retired coaches, and even amateur players who wanted to give back. Within the first month, over 3,000 kids had signed up. Some logged in from school libraries, others from community centers. Some even played on borrowed devices in foster homes. Liam watched the sign-ups grow, not with pride, but with a sense of responsibility. He responded to emails personally. He stayed up late to fix bugs. He didn't want to become famous. He wanted to make space. Meanwhile, Angela received a call from a luxury hotel in downtown Seattle. The general manager had seen the viral clip. He wanted her, not out of pity, but out of recognition. "You handled that night with dignity few could match," he told her over the phone. "We'd be honored if you led our facilities team." It came with triple the pay, full medical benefits, and paid time off, something she hadn't had in years. Angela said yes, then cried alone in the hallway before composing herself and returning to mop the last corner of the apartment kitchen, out of habit, more than necessity. They didn't move to a mansion. They didn't buy new clothes or hire drivers. Liam still took the bus to school. Angela still packed lunch in reused containers. But the energy in the air had changed, not just for them, but for anyone who had ever felt overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. Because now, when people told Liam he was lucky, he'd simply smile and say, "Luck doesn't memorize openings. Luck doesn't study at 5 a.m. Luck doesn't wait 6 years for someone to notice." And just like that, he kept playing. Only now, he played for more than himself. Madison Crane sat alone in her penthouse apartment overlooking the Seattle skyline, the same skyline that once shimmered with promise, with ambition, with all the illusions she had built her empire upon. The lights still blinked across the bay. The glass towers still reached for the clouds, but the reflection in her floor-to-ceiling windows was no longer flattering. It was empty. It had been weeks since anyone returned her calls out of genuine interest. The group chats she once dominated had gone quiet. Her name had vanished from 3 conference panels she had been scheduled to headline. No public explanation. Just quiet removals, polite rejections. Doors gently closed without needing to be slammed. She scrolled through her inbox, finding it suddenly filled with messages she didn't want. Apologies from acquaintances who were distancing. Notes from PR consultants offering reputation management packages. And one final message from her own assistant, politely resigning. But the worst part wasn't the silence. It was the absence of the illusion. For the first time, she realized that all those years of power had been rented, not earned. And now the lease was up. She replayed the video again, the one she swore she'd never watch, just to understand what they saw that she didn't. Liam standing, calm, composed, graceful. Herself, rigid, dismissive, unraveling in real time. It was all there, not dramatized, not edited, just recorded, and undeniable. She paused it just before he placed the final piece. Her hand reached for the screen, as if she could stop it from happening again. But she couldn't, because it hadn't started on the board. It had started long before, with every time she chose charm over character, control over empathy, arrogance over growth. She poured herself a drink, but didn't sip it. Instead, she sat in the dark, letting the city lights blink around her, unable to quiet the one voice in her head that refused to fade. You didn't lose because he was lucky. You lost because you never saw him coming. 6 months after the match, Liam Carter stood on a modest stage at a community event hosted by the public library, where he used to study alone after school. He wasn't wearing a suit, no spotlights, no grand production. Just a button-down shirt his mother had ironed with care, a mic that buzzed faintly, and a room filled with kids who looked at him the way he once looked at silent shelves of forgotten chess books, with curiosity and quiet hope. He didn't talk about checkmates or openings. He talked about patience, about discipline, about walking to the library when your feet hurt, and studying when the lights are out, and your world feels like it's made of locked doors. He said something that silenced the whole room, not because it was loud, but because it rang true. Power, he said, isn't what you take from others. It's what you build inside yourself when no one's watching, and no one expects you to win. That line didn't come from a textbook. It came from fire, from experience. From every quiet morning, he woke up before dawn to train his mind, because he didn't have the luxury of waiting to be noticed. Today, Liam doesn't talk much about Madison Crane, and he never once mentioned her by name in interviews. Because he didn't need to. His success was never about revenge. It was about rising above the limits others tried to assign him. Madison became a footnote. He became the narrative. And the most powerful stories, as Liam had learned, aren't told with noise. They're told with actions, with consistency, with resilience. So if you've ever been told that you're just a background character in someone else's story, remember this. Sometimes, the quietest player on the board turns out to be the one holding the final move. And if this story moved something in you, even just a little, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because there are more stories like Liam's out there. Stories of quiet strength, of underestimated brilliance, of dignity that refuses to bow. And we're here to tell every one of them.